You've probably heard this before. If someone loves you, they'll show it. But what if that's not always true? What if love doesn't always come dressed in grand gestures, romantic speeches, or daily reassurances? What if some of the deepest forms of love are shown in the most confusing, contradictory, and even painful ways? This is where the story of the avoidantly attached partner begins. And this isn't just psychology talk. This is real, raw human experience. You might be in a situation right now where someone you deeply care about keeps pulling away. They vanish without warning. They act cold when things get warm. They give you just enough to hold on, then disappear. And you're left questioning, do they love me, or am I just imagining everything? If this resonates, then what you're about to discover might shift the way you see not only them, but love itself. Here's the problem. Most of us have been raised with a very specific and often narrow concept of what love should look like. That love is obvious, that people who care will always be consistent, expressive, and present. But this belief leaves us completely unprepared for a different kind of love. The kind that's real but hidden. The kind that lives behind defenses, behind silence, behind behaviors that look like rejection, but are actually signs of fear. Most people mistake these signs as indifference. They walk away feeling unwanted. But what if that coldness was actually a cry for connection? What if everything you thought was disinterest was actually survival? This video is not just information, it's a decoding, a translation of a hidden emotional language. Most people never learn to read the language of the avoidant. And here's the thing, once you start to understand this pattern, you'll never see certain people the same way again. You'll begin to notice how absence can scream louder than words, how avoidance doesn't mean apathy, it means overload, and how someone can be deeply in love with you, yet completely incapable of expressing it the way you expect. This is about stepping out of romantic fantasy and into emotional reality. We're going to dive deep into the 6 most powerful things an avoidant does when they're in love but don't know how to say it. And I'm not talking about vague theory. I'm talking about behavior you can observe, things that may have left you confused, angry, heartbroken, but now they'll finally start to make sense. As we explore each part, I'm going to ask you questions to help you reflect, to shift your perspective, and to recognize signs you might have missed. You may realize that you were never unloved. You were just being loved in a language that no one ever taught you how to understand. So stay with me because what we're about to uncover might just change the way you experience relationships forever. And by the end of this video, you won't just understand avoidant love. You'll know how to spot it, interpret it, and even navigate it with grace, clarity, and maybe even a little bit of love's stoic wisdom that keeps your own heart grounded. Now let's begin. 1. They disappear when things get too close. When someone avoidantly attached begins to fall for you, their first instinct often isn't to pull you closer. It's to retreat. And this is one of the most emotionally disorienting experiences a person can go through. Imagine building a connection with someone where everything feels aligned, sparks fly, shared glances linger, intimate conversations unfold. And then, just when you feel things getting deeper, they vanish. No warning, no explanation, just gone. The silence feels deafening. You start to replay everything in your head. Did I say something wrong? Did I come on too strong? Were they even into me at all? But what if the answer isn't rejection, it's regulation? See, for someone with avoidant attachment, closeness doesn't feel like safety. It feels like a loss of control. Their nervous system has been wired, often since childhood, to perceive intimacy as risky. Vulnerability is not something they welcome, it's something they brace against. So when emotions build and their feelings for you grow stronger, it's not joy they feel first, it's threat. That intensity activates the parts of them that were trained to survive emotional chaos, abandonment, or betrayal. And so instead of leaning into the connection, they retreat from it. Not because they want to hurt you, but because their body, mind, and emotional system are screaming at them to protect themselves. That disappearance you feel? It's their version of a panic attack. And in that moment, disappearing feels safer than staying present. Here's where Stoicism helps us. Detachment isn't always indifference. In Stoicism, we learn to separate our judgments from our emotions. We learn to pause and ask, what else could be true here? What meaning am I assigning to this silence? What if this isn't about me being unwanted, but about them being overwhelmed? You have to understand that many avoidants associate love with being consumed, engulfed, or lost. Love to them isn't warmth, it's risk. So when they start to feel deeply for someone, they instinctively create distance. It might be physical, canceling plans, ghosting for days, suddenly needing space. Or it might be emotional, shorter replies, less engagement, less presence. And because they usually lack the language to explain what's happening internally, they just withdraw. They're not trained to process emotional heat, they're trained to reduce it. But here's the twist. Their absence doesn't mean their feelings are gone. Quite the opposite. Often, they withdraw because their emotions are too intense. So they hide, thinking that pulling away will help them feel in control again. And during that time, they might replay moments with you in their head, stalk your profile, look at your pictures, listen to your voice notes, or ask mutual friends how you're doing, but they won't reach out. Why? Because to reach out would be to admit vulnerability. To reconnect would mean facing the very feelings they're trying to suppress. That's the paradox of avoidant love. It's not cold because it doesn't exist. It's cold because it burns. Have you ever been in a relationship where the deeper things got, the more distant they became? Where moments of closeness were followed by silence? Where you felt like things were going well and then suddenly you were left hanging? That's not inconsistency. That's fear. And here's the deeper cut. Most people walk away at this point. They assume the silence means they don't care. They match the distance with, and that might be the most understandable yet tragic misinterpretation of all. Because avoidants don't pull away from people they feel nothing for. They pull away from those who've gotten close enough to touch the softest parts of them. Their disappearance is often a sign that you matter more than they're comfortable with. This is where love Stoic thinking becomes vital. Can you remain grounded in yourself without needing to control their actions? Can you interpret their withdrawal through the lens of emotional survival instead of personal offense? This doesn't mean you tolerate emotional neglect. Stoicism is not about passive suffering, but it is about perspective. It's about understanding that avoidance isn't a strategy to hurt you. It's a mechanism to protect themselves. And until they've healed those internal wounds, love will always feel like danger. Now, this doesn't mean you should chase them or beg for closeness. In fact, that often makes things worse. The more you pursue, the more their system feels invaded. But if you can hold your own emotional center, if you can be consistent without being overbearing, you create the possibility of safety, and safety to an avoidant is everything. Because they've never been taught that love can exist without loss. They don't yet know that you can stay without engulfing them. So their first reflex is to run, not from you, but from the vulnerability that you represent. And what hurts the most is that they rarely explain this. They don't say, I care too much and I'm scared. They just go silent. They convince themselves that pulling away is better for both of you, that disappearing will give them clarity, that time and space will help them control the storm inside. But often, what they really do is suffer in silence, haunted by the very attachment they're trying to deny. Have you ever received a message out of the blue after weeks of nothing, something small, like a meme or a thinking of you? That's not random. That's them resurfacing when the fear is settled just enough to risk connection again. That's their version of I miss you, filtered through the lens of stoicism and self-protection. And you might be wondering, is it fair? Is it sustainable to love someone who disappears every time they get close? These are important questions because understanding is not the same as tolerating dysfunction. Your needs matter, your emotional safety matters, but before you walk away, ask yourself, is this person cold or scared? Are they indifferent or overwhelmed? Is this absence punishment or protection? The answers may surprise you and they may shift how you move through this dynamic. Because when you see avoidance through the eyes of compassion and stoicism, you realize something powerful. That love doesn't always speak clearly. Sometimes it hides, sometimes it runs, sometimes it disappears, not because it's absent, but because it's too intense to face. And if you can recognize that, you don't just protect your own peace, you also give space for something deeper to emerge. Maybe not today, maybe not even with this person, but the clarity you gain from this perspective becomes part of your emotional intelligence, your love stoic resilience, and that is priceless. 2. They remember the smallest details about you. It's easy to assume that someone who avoids intimacy doesn't notice you. They don't text much. They act aloof. They disappear when things feel intense. So we believe maybe they don't care. But here's where the contradiction begins to show, because even in their silence, even in their distance, an avoidantly attached person is paying very, very close attention. They may not offer long messages or call you every day, but they will remember the exact words you said during that vulnerable conversation 3 weeks ago, the way your voice cracked when you talked about your childhood, your favorite brand of coffee, your go-to comfort show, the name of your childhood pet, the fact that you hate small talk and love thunderstorms. But they won't always say these things out loud, not at first. See, this is where the language of avoidant love becomes so subtle. It's almost invisible. They're collecting data not to manipulate, but to connect. In their world, learning you is safer than expressing how they feel about you, because saying I love you or I miss you feels far too vulnerable. But knowing your favorite kind of tea and bringing it over one day without explanation, that's how they say it. That's how they show it. They aren't expressing affection the way most people are trained to recognize. They're speaking in acts of observation, quietly, consistently, and almost always under the radar. But make no mistake. This isn't casual. This is deliberate. This is personal. This is attachment. Because if you meant nothing to them, they wouldn't store these details like treasured secrets. They wouldn't notice the songs you like or the subtle changes in your tone. They wouldn't be able to recall the way you fidget when you're nervous or the fact that you always check your horoscope but pretend not to believe in it. These aren't random details. These are emotional landmarks. They are building a map of you, not because they're trying to control you, but because this is how they stay close without getting caught in the vulnerability trap. In Stoicism, we talk about observation as a path to understanding, to see clearly, to strip away assumptions and ego. This is what avoidants do, but from the shadows. They observe everything, not to judge, but to make sense of what they feel but can't say. Think about it. Has someone ever surprised you by remembering a passing comment you made weeks ago, something you didn't even think mattered, but they did? That's not nothing. That's love filtered through the lens of restraint. That's what love stoic connection looks like. Less about dramatic declarations, more about careful awareness. They may never say, I think about you all the time, but they'll notice the smallest shift in your energy and ask if you're okay. They may not hold your hand in public, but they'll make sure you're walking on the inside of the sidewalk. They may not like your post, but they've read every word and remember what you said. Why? because they're watching not in a creepy way, but in a protective way, in a way that says, you matter to me, but I don't know how to tell you without unraveling everything I've built to protect myself. And if you ask them directly, they'll probably downplay it. They might say, oh, I just noticed. Or you mentioned it once, no big deal. But it is a big deal because these small details are the building blocks of emotional intimacy. For someone afraid of closeness, these observations are safer than confessions. And when they act on them, when they adjust their behavior based on what they know about you, that is their form of affection. That is love expressed without being named. In Stoicism, love isn't about theatrics. It's about action rooted in awareness. It's about showing up in ways that are measured, grounded, intentional. Avoidants, ironically, often embody this more than anyone. They won't sweep you off your feet with poetry, but they will quietly make sure your favorite snacks are in their kitchen. They won't flood your inbox with sweet nothings, but they'll remember your big meeting at work and send you a song that makes you feel strong. That's how they show they're paying attention. That's how they say you're in here even if their mouth won't move. Now, you may ask, why not just say the words? Why not just tell me how they feel? Here's why. Words are dangerous to someone with avoidant wiring. Words have power. Words open doors they're terrified to walk through because for them, saying something like I care about you could create expectations, vulnerability, dependency, and all of that equals risk. So they keep it inside. They express it in indirect, almost untraceable ways. But make no mistake, the emotion is there. In fact, it's often stronger than it is for those who express it easily. That's the paradox. The people who say the least often feel the most. And this is where most people miss the signs. They're waiting for the big gesture, the clear sign, the romantic overture, but avoidant love doesn't show up with fireworks. It shows up with quiet consistency. It shows up when they remember how you like your eggs. When they play a song they know reminds you of your dad. When they sit next to you in silence because they know words aren't what you need. When they notice you had a hard day before you even say it. All of these small behaviors are massive when they come from someone who lives in emotional lockdown. And if you're not watching closely, you'll miss them. You'll think they're uninterested, but they're actually loving you in the only way they know how. By paying attention to what matters to you, even if they never admit how much you matter to them. That's why understanding this pattern is so critical, because if you can't recognize avoidant love, you'll walk away thinking you were invisible, when really you were the only thing they couldn't stop seeing. And this matters because emotional literacy is power. Love Stoic awareness is power. Being able to decode these subtle acts gives you clarity, and clarity gives you freedom. You'll stop personalizing the silence. You'll stop needing constant reassurance. And you'll start to see the love that was always there, just hidden behind a wall of fear. And remember, avoidants aren't cold people. They're deeply emotional. So emotional that their system has learned to suppress as a survival tactic. Their attention to detail is one of the few safe ways they can stay connected. It's how they love without the risk of being consumed by it. And now that you see it, maybe you can meet that love with grace, not by abandoning your needs, but by recognizing the different dialects of affection. So the next time someone remembers something small that matters to you, don't overlook it. Don't assume it's random. Ask yourself, what if this is their version of I care? What if this is love without the label? What if everything I need to know is already being shown, just not spoken? If you felt seen in this part of the video, if it made something click, take a moment to let us know. Like this video and comment 1 inch below if you're beginning to understand this pattern in your own life. And if you want more insights like this, deep, honest, and emotionally grounded through the lens of Stoicism and modern psychology, hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey. We're just getting started. Let's keep going. 3. They send random messages out of nowhere. There's something strange that happens when you try to move on from someone avoidant. Just as the emotional fog begins to lift, just as you're starting to regain your balance, you receive a message out of nowhere. It's short, sometimes vague, maybe a meme, maybe just hey, maybe a comment on something meaningless. And suddenly, your mind is thrown into a spiral. Why now? What does this mean? Do they care? Are they bored? Are they trying to come back? This unpredictable contact can feel disorienting, especially when it follows a period of cold distance. But here's what you need to understand. These messages aren't random. They are timed by emotion, not logic. They arrive when their internal emotional pressure becomes unbearable, when their thoughts of you override their defenses, even if just for a moment. To them, it's not a big deal. It's just a check-in, a signal, a whisper through the noise of their avoidance. But to you, it feels like a door that was slammed shut, suddenly creaking open. It reignites hope, doubt, confusion, sometimes all at once. And that's where you need discernment, because these moments are loaded with meaning, but not always the meaning you think. For someone avoidantly attached, reaching out doesn't necessarily mean readiness. It doesn't mean they've healed. It doesn't mean they're suddenly available. What it means is that you never really left their mind, that despite all the space they created, the connection never fully severed. And now their system is craving relief from that tension. This is a survival reflex, a way to touch the attachment without drowning in it. But why not just say what they feel? Why not pick up the phone and say, I miss you? Because that would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is what they fear most. So they do something safer. They send a neutral message, one that gives nothing away, a breadcrumb, not a meal. But inside that breadcrumb is a world of emotion they can't yet bring themselves to process. This is where Stoicism becomes powerful again. In the practice of Stoicism, we learn to pause, observe, and choose our response rather than react impulsively. So when you receive that message, don't assume. Don't rush to reply. Ask yourself, what is this message really about? What emotional need is it meeting for them? What emotional trigger is it activating in me? Because sometimes these messages aren't about love. They're about regulation. Sometimes they miss the idea of you more than the reality. Sometimes they want to know you're still there, still orbiting their emotional world. And sometimes they're hoping you'll do the emotional labor they're too afraid to do themselves. It's not always manipulative. In fact, it's rarely conscious. But it is a pattern that often traps people in cycles of confusion. Because every time you start to detach, they reel you back in just enough to feel safe, and then they disappear again. This is the push-pull dynamic that defines many avoidant relationships, and it's not driven by cruelty. It's driven by fear, fear of closeness, fear of rejection, fear of losing control. So these random messages are actually perfectly timed to maintain emotional distance and connection. It's the perfect illusion of engagement without vulnerability. Have you experienced this? The late night text, the comment on your story, the sudden I had a dream about you after weeks of silence. These aren't coincidences. They are escape hatches from the pressure they're feeling inside. They're designed to reopen a line without committing to conversation. And if you respond, especially with warmth, it soothes them. It tells them you're still there. It restores control. But here's the trap. Now you feel destabilized because you were healing. You were detaching. You were starting to accept their absence. And suddenly they're back, but only with a whisper. Not enough to feel whole, just enough to feel confused. This is the agony of loving someone who can't stay present. Their contact doesn't always mean what you hope. And this is where you have to decide, are you willing to be the emotional anchor in a storm they won't even acknowledge? Are you willing to interpret every vague message like a code? Are you waiting for someone who keeps reaching out just enough to stop you from walking away, but never far enough to actually arrive? These questions are hard. They require radical honesty, but they also create emotional freedom. Because once you understand this pattern, you stop assigning magical meaning to a meme. You stop building a fantasy around a 3-word text. You see it for what it is, a survival tactic, a sign of emotional unrest, a symptom of unprocessed feelings, and you get to choose how to respond. You're no longer caught in their pattern. You become the observer, not the reactor. And that too is a form of love Stoic power. Avoidants don't mean to hurt you with these messages, but they often do unintentionally by creating false hope. Because to you, that message might feel like an invitation, but to them it might just be an outlet. This is the gap between intention and impact. And if you don't understand it, you'll live in a constant loop of anticipation and disappointment. The solution? Awareness. Grounded awareness. The kind Stoicism teaches. Where you respond not to your desires, but to reality. Where you interpret messages not based on wishful thinking, but on patterns. If this person has repeatedly sent vague messages only to withdraw again, you have your answer not in the message, but in the behavior that follows. Love is not found in a meme. It's found in consistency. An avoidant love, though real, is often marked by inconsistency, not because it's fake, but because it's unregulated. So if they're not ready to regulate themselves, you must be the one to regulate yourself. To not chase clarity from someone who can't offer it. To not mistake contact for commitment. To not let one message rewrite a history of silence. This is how you protect your peace. This is how you reclaim your emotional power. This is how you honor the truth of your experience. You can appreciate the message. You can even respond with grace, but don't get lost in it. Don't let it reopen wounds that were starting to heal. Remember, the message is not the relationship. The relationship is what happens after the message, in the consistency, in the follow-through, in the showing up. Anything less is noise, a momentary flicker of emotion from someone still afraid of the fire. And while that fire may be real, love without courage is just a cycle of pain. So the next time your phone lights up with that familiar name, take a breath, remember what you've learned, and ask yourself, is this a beginning or just another loop? And if you want love that's steady, present, and grounded, love that aligns with Stoicism, love that honors your worth, then let their message be information, not transformation. You deserve more than breadcrumbs. You deserve the meal. 4. They get jealous subtly and indirectly. Jealousy is one of the most revealing emotions an avoidant will ever show. Not because they want to, but because they can't help it. Unlike secure individuals who may communicate their insecurities openly, or even anxious individuals who may confront them head-on, avoidants try to suppress jealousy until it leaks out in passive, often confusing ways. They might make a sarcastic comment when you mention a friend of the opposite sex. Withdraw after seeing a post of you with someone else. Suddenly go cold, change the subject, or tease you in a way that carries an undertone of discomfort. And yet when you ask them directly, they'll deny it. They'll pretend it's no big deal. They'll act indifferent. But the behavior speaks louder than the denial. That shift in energy, that guarded body language, that subtle criticism, it's not random. It's emotional leakage. For someone whose entire self-protection mechanism revolves around emotional detachment, jealousy is a glitch in the system. It's the one feeling they can't completely control because it's rooted in fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of losing something they never even fully claimed. That's the tragic contradiction. They'll avoid intimacy but feel possessive. They'll refuse to commit but react when they sense competition. They don't want to admit they care, but they also can't bear the idea of you being cared for by someone else. This is why Stoicism becomes such a powerful tool in these moments, because Stoicism teaches us not to react to appearances, but to observe the deeper currents. You have to ask yourself, when they pull back after I mention someone new, is it because they're uninterested, or is it because they care more than they're comfortable showing? When they joke about your other relationships, is it really humor, or is it a shield to mask insecurity? You'll notice that the more emotionally significant you become to an avoidant, the more these subtle signs begin to surface. They'll ask indirect questions about people in your life. They'll scroll through your comments but never like your posts. They'll go quiet when you share a story that involves someone they see as a threat. And all of this is fueled by a hidden narrative they never speak aloud. That love means losing control, and control is their safety. So instead of expressing their emotions, they try to regulate them, but jealousy isn't easily regulated. It shows up in their tone, their timing, their tension. It shows up in the way they stop texting for days after seeing something that stirs them, in the way they bring up other people to test you, to see if you'll react, to see if you care as much as they do but won't admit. And if you're not grounded, if you don't recognize these signs, you'll internalize it. You'll think they're losing interest. You'll feel like you've done something wrong. You'll start shrinking yourself, walking on eggshells, avoiding topics just to keep the peace. But the truth is, their jealousy isn't your burden. It's a signal, a sign that you've touched a nerve, that you've entered emotional territory they don't know how to navigate. And ironically, that jealousy is often one of the clearest indicators that they're attached, even if they'll never say it. They may even act dismissive when you confront them. They may accuse you of overthinking, but deep down they're feeling it all, silently, painfully, profoundly. In a strange way, jealousy humanizes the avoidant. It exposes what they work so hard to hide. And if you're emotionally intelligent, if you've trained yourself in love Stoic thinking, you'll be able to see it without reacting to it. You won't need to argue. You won't need to demand clarity. You'll just observe the contradiction for what it is. A confession masked as criticism. You'll learn to say, I see what's happening without needing to prove anything. And that clarity gives you power. The power to respond from a place of stability rather than scarcity. It allows you to meet their defensiveness with calm, their sarcasm with empathy, their silence with perspective. Because you know what's really going on beneath the surface. You know that their jealousy isn't about control, it's about fear. It's about the panic of losing someone who matters more than they want to admit. And here's the twist. Avoidants don't get jealous over people they don't care about. They're not possessive by nature. They're distant, independent, sometimes even cold. So when they start acting possessive, even in subtle ways, it means something. It means you've disrupted their emotional equation. It means you've triggered a depth of feeling that contradicts everything they've been trying to protect themselves from. And that contradiction creates tension they don't know how to manage. So they do what they've always done. They retreat, they mask, they deflect. But you can see it now. You can feel the shift. You can recognize the signs. And with that recognition, you can choose how to navigate it. You can decide whether this is a dynamic you want to continue investing in. You can set boundaries without shutting down. You can have compassion without losing your clarity. And if you're the kind of person who values emotional maturity, who believes in depth, who honors growth, then this is your moment, because this level of awareness puts you in control, not of them, but of yourself. And that's the essence of Stoicism, mastering your own response regardless of what others choose to hide or reveal. So when the avoidant in your life starts acting a little different after you mention someone else, when they pull back, go cold, or throw shade, don't dismiss it, don't internalize it. See it for what it is. Love tangled in fear, affection wrapped in avoidance, jealousy filtered through pride. and let that awareness guide you. Because once you learn to read these signals, once you stop taking them at face value, you'll never be confused by them again. You'll know exactly what they mean. And more importantly, you'll know exactly what you need. If this message spoke to you, if you felt that quiet recognition of truth sinking into your gut, then let us know. Like this video and comment 1 inch below if this part helped you decode a moment that once left you confused. And if you want to continue learning how to understand emotional patterns with power, patience, and the wisdom of Stoicism, then don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel and join us in mastering love without losing yourself. 5. They push you away to see if you'll stay. One of the most painful, misunderstood, and paradoxical behaviors of an avoidant partner is this. They push you away not because they want you gone, but because they need to know if you'll still choose them when they're at their most unlovable. It's not conscious sabotage, it's survival. And if you've ever felt the sharp sting of being shut out, dismissed, or suddenly treated like you no longer matter just after things were going well, you've witnessed this pattern firsthand. It feels like whiplash. One moment you're laughing together, connecting, maybe even sharing something vulnerable, and the next they're distant, irritable, maybe even cold. No explanation, no closure, and you're left wondering what just happened. The answer is rooted in fear. Deep, core level fear. For avoidantly attached people, the moment connection starts to feel safe is the moment their nervous system goes on high alert. They begin to question the authenticity of what they're feeling, not because it isn't real, but because real love has always been associated with pain, loss, or engulfment. So, what do? They test you, not in a game-playing manipulative sense, but from a place of terrified self-protection. They want to know, will you still want me if I make it hard to love me? Will you abandon me if I'm not agreeable, warm, or consistent? Will you stick around if I shut down? They may not even realize they're doing it. The pattern is often subconscious, like muscle memory, but that doesn't make it any less real. This is the part that devastates most people, because the better things get, the more they expect closeness, connection, consistency. But the avoidant panics. Their brain associates the rise in intimacy with a loss of self. So they sabotage, they pick fights, they criticize you, they withdraw emotionally. Sometimes they go silent altogether. And the worst part, they'll blame it on something else. Work, stress, needing space, because they themselves can't admit that love terrifies them. That you matter so much, it threatens the very identity they've built around not needing anyone. This is where so many people give up. They think the push away means rejection, that it's a sign the avoidant never really cared. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The push is a sign of internal war. One part of them wants to attach, to lean in, to be known. The other part believes that to love is to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable is to suffer. And so they push not to hurt you, but to protect themselves from what feels like inevitable abandonment. And here's the tragic irony. By pushing you away, they create the very outcome they fear. They drive people off. They confirm their belief that no one stays. And yet, this doesn't stop the cycle. It reinforces it. So they keep doing it again and again with every relationship that feels real. If you've been on the receiving end of this behavior, you know how emotionally exhausting it is. You start questioning your worth, your sanity, your intuition. You wonder, was it all in my head? How could someone who acted so connected now act so cold? And unless you understand this pattern, it will break you. This is why the Love Stoic approach is so critical. Stoicism teaches us to stay centered in truth, not emotion, to respond with clarity instead of reactivity, and to see beyond the surface into the deeper causes of behavior. So instead of taking the push personally, we ask, what's really happening here? Is this cruelty or fear? Is this indifference or panic? Is this rejection or a desperate need to be proven wrong about being unworthy? You'll find that the answer is almost always rooted in their need for control. Control gives them distance. Distance gives them safety, and safety, for the avoidant, is the only way they know how to coexist with love. But here's the thing, this behavior is not sustainable. You cannot build a healthy relationship around someone else's emotional defense system. You cannot keep proving your worth to someone who is committed to believing no one will stay. Eventually, you will burn out. Eventually, you will internalize their push as your fault. And that's where the real damage happens. So if you're seeing this pattern play out in your connection, step back, not out of punishment, but out of wisdom, out of stoic love for yourself. Understand the behavior, recognize the test, but don't take it on as your burden to fix. It's not your job to prove to them that love can be safe. It's their job to do the healing necessary to receive it. Your job is to remain grounded, to protect your emotional center, and to see clearly. His love is not found in the staying alone. It's found in mutual willingness, in mutual vulnerability, in mutual effort. If you're the only one trying to hold the connection together every time they push, then what you have isn't love. It's survival. And you deserve more than survival. You deserve a love that meets you with openness, not just silent tests. And yet, if they ever begin to do the work, if they recognize the pattern, admit the fear, and start leaning in despite the panic, then you'll know the push wasn't in vain. It was part of their growth, but that has to come from them. You can't force it. You can't love someone into healing. You can only love them with boundaries. And sometimes that means walking away when the pushing becomes a pattern. Because the truth is, love isn't measured by how much pain you can endure. Love in its healthy form is a safe space, not a battlefield. And yet many avoidants don't realize they're even at war. They're simply reenacting the only form of emotional safety they've ever known: distance. Until they learn a new way, they will continue to test every person who gets close. And if you're caught in that cycle, your clarity is your lifeline. It's what keeps you from drowning in their storm. And it's what reminds you that being pushed away is not always about being unwanted. It's often about being too wanted in a way they don't yet know how to handle. 6. They break their own rules for you. For someone with avoidant attachment, emotional boundaries aren't just preferences, they are survival strategies. These individuals construct a strict internal rulebook designed to keep them safe from vulnerability, emotional exposure, and perceived loss of control. They live by these rules, often unconsciously, repeating patterns like never texting first, never getting too attached, never staying the night, never opening up about past wounds. These rules act as armor, shielding them from the intimacy that once felt dangerous, even unbearable. But what happens when someone comes along who pierces through their defenses, not by force, but by presence? What happens when their desire for closeness begins to outweigh their fear? That's when the rules begin to bend. Quietly, slowly, without announcement. You start to notice them doing things they once swore they'd never do. They reach out first, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes under the guise of something casual. They initiate plans. They offer help. They open up about parts of themselves you didn't expect them to reveal. These moments are easy to overlook, especially when they're wrapped in avoidance patterns. But if you look closely, they are massive signs of internal change. Avoidants don't break their rules for just anyone. They break them for the people who shake something loose inside them, who destabilize the illusion that they're better off alone. This behavior is perhaps the clearest indicator that they love you, even if they can't say the words, because breaking their emotional code feels dangerous, yet they still choose to do it. And this is where love stoic perception is essential. You must be emotionally attuned enough to see these moments for what they are. Tiny acts of courage from someone who has spent their entire life learning to fear emotional risk. They may not announce it, they may even downplay it afterward, retreating into sarcasm or deflection, but the shift is real. It's in the fact that they remembered your schedule, the way they agreed to meet your friends after resisting it for months, the time they showed up when you were sick, even though they hate hospitals or emotional intensity. The vulnerability in their eyes when they finally let their guard down and told you about the betrayal they've never spoken of. These are not just behaviors, they are sacrifices to them. Each broken rule is a risk of identity, and yet they take it again and again because the connection matters more than the safety net. This is why you must learn to recognize these moments without demanding more than they can give. You must meet their effort with grounded strength, not pressure. Stoicism teaches us that love is not control. It is clarity. It is understanding what is rather than projecting what should be. So when they break their own rules, meet them where they are. Don't demand explanations. Don't point it out to prove something. Simply honor the gesture. Let it breathe. Let it mean what it means without needing it to look like a movie scene. Because for them, love is not about drama. It's about endurance. It's about showing up when every fiber of their nervous system tells them to run. And when they stay, even awkwardly, even inconsistently, it is a kind of devotion that can't be faked. Have you noticed the shift in someone you're close to? Have they gone against their own grain? Done something that surprised you? Opened up when they normally shut down? That's not a mistake. That's not a slip. That's love. Raw, messy, terrifying love, shown in the only language they've ever known, action over words, presence over performance. But remember, this doesn't mean they're healed. The fear is still there. The push-pull dynamic may continue. But these cracks in the armor matter. They are the beginning of transformation. And if nurtured carefully, without ego, without urgency, they can lead to something extraordinary. A deeper connection, a healthier bond, a relationship where two people are no longer playing roles, they are showing up as themselves. That's what love's Stoic awareness offers, the ability to witness change without needing to control it. To see love in the slow, painful, powerful undoing of someone's defenses, and to know that just because it doesn't come in the form you expected doesn't mean it isn't real. In fact, when an avoidant breaks their own rules for you, it might be the most honest form of love you've ever been given. It's not loud, it's not perfect, but it's brave. And that bravery deserves to be seen. If this spoke to you, if you've witnessed these rule-breaking moments in someone you care about, or if you've started to realize how much love can hide behind discomfort, like this video and comment 1 inch below. And if you're committed to understanding love not just as a feeling, but as a daily act of growth, presence, and emotional mastery through Stoicism, subscribe now and keep learning how to love smarter, not just harder. By now, you've probably realized something deeply uncomfortable, but also deeply liberating. Loving an avoidant doesn't look like the kind of love we've been taught to expect. It doesn't follow the rules of fairy tales or pop songs. It doesn't come dressed in daily affection, dramatic confessions, or sweeping gestures. No, avoidant love is something far more complex. It is cautious, contradictory, fragmented, and yet no less real. This kind of love lives in the cracks, in the pauses, in the spaces where most people stop looking. And if you've ever loved someone avoidant, you felt it. The tension between presence and absence. The ache of unspoken connection. The frustration of being seen and yet not fully met. But now you see the pattern. Now you understand that. It wasn't rejection, it was fear. It wasn't detachment, it was overload. It wasn't manipulation, it was survival. When you begin to decode this emotional language, you also begin to reclaim your own clarity. You start to realize that their silence may have been a scream, that their absence might have been a form of presence too heavy for them to carry. You begin to soften, not in weakness, but in wisdom. You begin to ask better questions. Not, why don't they love me? But what are they afraid of? Not, what did I do wrong? But what wound is being triggered right now? You move from reaction to reflection, from chaos to clarity, from confusion to compassion. But here's where it gets even more powerful. You stop needing to be chosen. You stop needing to prove your worth to someone still fighting their own internal battle, because your worth was never in question. It just got buried under their fear. When you understand the nature of avoidance, you stop taking it personally. And that single shift, moving from personalization to observation, is where your power begins. You no longer chase inconsistent love. You no longer mistake hot and cold behavior for passion. You start looking for stability, reciprocity, emotional courage. You begin to apply what we call, in this space, the mindset of the love Stoic. Not someone who is cold, but someone who is composed. Not someone who avoids emotion, but someone who understands it deeply and responds with presence, not panic. That's where your freedom lies, in the ability to love without losing yourself, to understand without overextending, to witness someone's trauma without becoming their emotional caretaker. This is not about fixing the avoidant. It's about honoring your own emotional truth while understanding theirs. It's about recognizing that while their behavior may stem from pain, that pain is not your responsibility to heal. You can see them clearly, love them deeply, and still protect your peace. You can acknowledge their fear without letting it control your story. Show compassion without abandoning your needs. Because yes, avoidants do love. Often, they love harder than they know how to admit. But they also fear love more than they're ready to confront. And until they do the work, until they learn how to sit with their discomfort, how to regulate their nervous system, how to stay emotionally present, even when it feels like fire, you cannot carry the relationship alone. Love cannot be a one-person effort, and that is the hardest truth of all, because it means that sometimes, even though the love is real, it is not enough. Not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't ready. And that's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their journey. You are not here to rescue someone from their emotional patterns. You are here to live a full, grounded, meaningful life, to give and receive love that feels expansive, not diminishing. So if you are currently in a relationship with someone avoidant, healing from one, or still trying to make sense of the mixed signals, take this with you. It wasn't your fault. Their distance wasn't a mirror of your unworthiness. Their silence wasn't a measurement of your irrelevance. Their withdrawal wasn't an erasure of what you built together. It was protection from their own fear. And now you have a choice. You can love them with open eyes, speak their language without forgetting your own, offer space without abandoning your standards. And if you must walk away, you can do so without bitterness, only clarity. Because you now understand the truth. That love can exist even when it cannot be expressed. That connection can be real even when it cannot be sustained. That some people enter our lives not to stay, but to teach us the language of contrast. To show us what fear looks like so that we can choose courage. To show us what chaos feels like so we can commit to peace. To show us what closed-off love looks like so we can seek the kind that opens. And if you're the kind of person who values depth, self-mastery, and emotional growth, this awareness will shape every future connection you have. You'll begin to recognize when someone is showing up with emotional honesty versus emotional armor. You'll stop mistaking inconsistency for chemistry. You'll hold yourself with more grace, more dignity, more calm, and you will begin to love like the love Stoic. Not with coldness, but with clarity. Not with detachment, but with discernment. Not with control, but with courage. Because now you see love not just as a feeling, but as a reflection of emotional capacity. And you are no longer chasing what hurts. You are standing in what heals. You are becoming someone who can hold space for others without losing space for yourself. That's what transformation looks like. Not in fireworks, but in quiet knowing. Not in chaos, but in calm. Not in needing to be loved at all costs, but in learning to love wisely, bravely, and with your eyes wide open. You don't need to harden. You don't need to become cold or guarded, but you do need to become clear. Clear on what love really means. Clear on what it costs to ignore the patterns. Clear on what it takes to build a connection that lasts, not just survives. This is what true emotional power looks like. This is what stoicism in love looks like. And this, more than anything, is how you move forward. Not with regret, not with longing, but with presence, with wisdom, with the quiet strength of someone who sees the storm and chooses peace anyway.